When a long-term relationship ends, it's almost always messy. But what happens when that relationship involves a superstar and his death pits his partner of decades against his legal family? Well, then it becomes a landmark legal battle. This case isn't just celebrity drama. It's a fight that forces us to ask some really tough questions about what a family is in the eyes of the law. Let's dive in.
Okay, so before we get into all the names and the legal jargon, let's just start with this. Just think about this very human question. Imagine this was you. You spend a quarter of a century with someone, and when they're gone, their family shows up and tells you to leave. It's a devastating scenario, and it's right at the heart of this entire story.
All right, so at the center of this whole thing, you've got three main players. First, the man himself, Rajesh Khanna, Bollywood's original superstar. Second, his estranged but still legally recognized wife, the actress Dimple Khanna. And third, Anita Advani, the woman who claims she was his partner for the last decades of his life.
So, how did we even get here? Let's just quickly walk through the timeline. Rajesh Khanna marries Dimple Khanna way back in 1973. They split up in 1982. Now here's the absolute kicker, the one detail everything else hinges on. They never ever legally divorced. Around the same time they separated, Anita Advani claims her long relationship with Khanna started. Flash forward to 2012, Rajesh Khanna passes away, and boom, the stage is set for a massive legal fight.
So, after Khanna passed away, Anita Advani did something really interesting. She didn't just file a standard lawsuit for money or property. No, she took a much more specific, and you could say strategic, legal route. She filed her complaint under a really powerful law, the Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act.
So here's the story from Advani's perspective. She painted a picture of a long, committed partnership. She claims she lived with Khanna for decades in his famous bungalow, Ashirvad. She said she was the one who cared for him when he was sick at the end. And crucially, she argued their relationship wasn't just a casual live-in thing, it was legally in the nature of marriage. Her biggest allegation? That just before he died, Khanna's family forcibly threw her out of the house.
And this wasn't just about getting a roof over her head. She was seeking damages. Specifically, 10 lakh rupees for the mental agony and harm she said the eviction caused her. So you can see, she was arguing that a real harm was done to her, separate from any inheritance issues.
Okay, so that's one side of the story. Now let's flip the coin and look at how the family responded. And their defense, well, it went way beyond just saying, that didn't happen. They attacked the very foundation of her case. And this slide right here, it just lays it all out, plain and simple. You've got two totally different versions of reality clashing. On one hand, Advani says their relationship was in the nature of marriage. On the other, the Khanna family calls it adulterous because, remember, he was still legally married. Advani says they all lived in a shared household. And the family says, no way, we never lived with you.
And that all boils down to the family's knockout legal argument, which, honestly, is pretty brilliant in its simplicity. They basically said, wait a minute, you can't sue us for domestic violence if we never had a domestic relationship with you in the first place. It's a simple but incredibly powerful point.
Okay, so to figure out who's actually right here, legally speaking, we gotta hit pause on the drama for a second. We need to unpack the actual laws the court was looking at. Seriously, understanding these next couple of points is the key to the whole case.
First up, what even is a domestic relationship in the eyes of the law? It's not just, living with someone. The act is super specific. It says two people have to live together in a shared household and be related in a specific way, by marriage, by blood, and then there's that phrase again, the one this whole case turns on, a relationship in the nature of marriage.
Which, of course, leads us to the million-dollar question, right? What in the world does "in the nature of marriage" actually mean to a judge? It sounds vague, but the Supreme Court of India actually created a test for it.
And that's this, the Velusamy test. Think of it like a checklist, and there are a few items on it, but I want you to pay really close attention to the very first one. Step 1, the couple has to be legally eligible to marry each other. Boom, right there. That means neither of them can already be married to someone else. This one point, it's about to become the linchpin of the whole decision.
All right, so now that we've got our legal decoder ring, let's jump back into the case and see exactly how the Bombay High Court used these rules to decide who was right.
And really, this quote from the judge says it all. It just cuts right to the chase.
The court declared that because Rajesh Khanna was still legally married to Dimple Khanna, his relationship with Anita Advani could not by legal definition be in the nature of marriage. End of story.
So, when you look at it, Advani's case basically fell apart for two big reasons. First, it completely failed that Velusamy test, right at step 1. He wasn't legally free to marry her. Second, the court totally bought the family's argument. Since she never lived in a shared household with Dimple and her kids, she couldn't have a domestic relationship with them. The court essentially said this might be a property dispute, but it's not a domestic violence case against the family.
So the final outcome? It was swift and decisive. The Bombay High Court threw out the entire case against the Khanna family. All proceedings quashed.
But hold on, the story doesn't just end with the verdict. This wasn't just some tabloid drama. This case left behind a really important and kind of controversial legal legacy that's still talked about today.
The ripple effects of this decision were huge, and it basically set 3 major rules. First, it clarified that in the nature of marriage means you have to be legally able to marry. Second, you can't sue your partner's relatives under the DV Act if you never lived with them. And third, it drew a really firm line in the sand, saying you can't use this specific law as a shortcut for inheritance claims.
But not everyone thinks this was the right call. The ruling is actually pretty controversial. On one hand, you have people who say, yep, that's the law. It's about protecting the legal status of marriage. But on the other hand, critics argue that this strict reading of the law creates a massive blind spot, potentially leaving women in long-term relationships with married men completely unprotected by this act, no matter how vulnerable they are.
And all of this leaves us with a really tough, lingering question. It's a fundamental conflict, isn't it? What's the law's main job here? Is it to protect the traditional institution of marriage, even if it means leaving some women in non-traditional relationships out in the cold? That's the debate this case blew wide open, and it's one that's still going on in courtrooms today.